All right, well, welcome to the review for the block session for exam 1. I'm going to share my screen so you can see the study guide, and we will go over the study guide. And if you have any questions while we're going over it, please either pop up in the chat box or speak up. And if you have any other kind of questions, just speak up and we'll get it taken care of. Sometimes I have too many windows open. There we go. All right, can everybody see the screen that has the study guide on it?
Yes.
Great,
Yes.
Great. Hi, Alpha, how are you today? Okay, so let's just start at the very, very top and we'll just work our way down. See if I can get the chat box up here. All right, so members the church have an obligation to the government. Now, initially you hear this and you think, okay, yeah, okay, whatever, I'll vote. But there's a little overarching umbrella with this. We not only have an obligation to vote so that we get good leaders and virtuous leaders in office, we all also have an obligation to be in those offices. So we have to put ourselves out there and be in those offices. President Benson was once interviewed about what his thoughts were of members of the church participating in the CIA and activities like that, that were maybe not fully what we would think a member of the church should do. And his simple answer was, I would rather a virtuous man in there than not. And so I think we have to remember that we have to do all sorts of things to make this country work. And so we have an obligation to not only participate, but to vote so that good people can be in there. Choice and accountability, that we're not punished for Adam's transgression. Choice in that we know that whatever we do, there is, we have lots of choices. Something that we have to remember, that choice and agency are very different things. We've all been given agency, and then within that agency, we have the ability to choose. With many times, my husband and I have an argument where he says that you say I always have a choice. And it's like, well, you can either choose to do what I say, or you can choose not to do what I say. And there's an accountability either way. So you always have a choice no matter where you are, but sometimes those choices may be a little bit more limited. And then of course, accountability. I once heard the comparison that accountability is like throwing a bat up in the air and then you don't really choose where the bat lands. And so you have to face the consequences, good or bad, of your choices. Popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty is basically the rule of a government is based from the power of the people. So all of the legitimacy, all of the power, everything is given from people are saying, okay, I understand that I'm a part of society, and so I'm giving my power of governance to you. We're going to talk a little bit more about that when we talk about natural law. President Kimball's church says that the church's responsibility is to help members is third. First, members need to help themselves, then they need to help their families, and then they can turn to the church for help. So when we're talking about provident living and virtuous living, we have to take care of ourselves and then our family, and if we still need some help, then we can go to the church, but we have to first and foremost take care of ourselves and our family. The U.S. proper host nation of the gospel. Now I know a lot of people saying, hey, not from the U.S., my country's a pretty good place. Why did it have to be the United States? We don't know. We really don't. But some of the reasons, I think we don't have the scope of God's knowledge. We're not omniscient, we're not omnipotent, we're not omnipresent, we don't have the full scope. And if you think about it, all these little things built up to certain things happening. And so I think sometimes we have to keep a little bit of an open mind, like, why does that happen? That's not fair. Well, life's not fair. But there is a plan, and we have a part in that plan. And so the U.S.'s part in that plan was to be the host nation for the gospel. And part of that comes from the colonists that came over on the Mayflower and the various other colonists, they came over for that religious freedom and that freedom to practice their religion in whatever scope it was, led to the thinking of, hey, well, if I can believe this way, I should be able to have political freedom too and economic freedom. And so it all kind of built on each other. And so once those things built on each other, the idea of letting new religions in and new ideas was okay. You have to remember that at the time of the independence of the colonies, being a Baptist was illegal. It was against the law. And as time went by, it stopped being illegal, and those freedoms escalated. And so, because of that mindset and ability, that's why the U.S. was kind of the proper host nation for the Restoration. True liberty. Now, in many cases, I think we think true liberty, it's like, okay, well, we get to do whatever we want. That's true liberty. Kind of. So in our course, true liberty is based on the governance of the nation. And it's the middle balance between absolute order and absolute freedom. It's kind of that middle point. There's a picture in your reading that it displays it's kind of like a seesaw, where at one end you have everybody doing whatever they want, and at the other end you have absolute control or a military state. And then the center of that is just the right amount of control and just the right amount of freedoms, and that's kind of where you want society to be. All right, so let's jump into the American Revolution. There's the patriot philosophers and the natural man. Now, in the reading, there's the patriot philosophers and the patriot rebels. What's the difference? The patriot philosophers are the thinkers. They're the studiers. They're the writers. They're usually more on the aristocratic side of things. Examples would be Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Madison. All those men were the thinkers. They were the attorneys, the philosophers. They wanted to do what was best in theory. And then you have the patriot rebels. And those were the men that were dressing up as Indians and dumping tea off of the boat. They were men of action. They were in there, they were doing it, they wanted things to change. And so that's people like Samuel Adams, usually a lot more blue collar workers who were on the ground for a lot of the things that were happening, a lot of the taxes. And so you had those two competing philosophies of how to do it. But many times they work together. So the patriot philosophers believed that the natural man was good and bad. And they wanted to focus on the good part, the virtuous part, and they didn't think that self-interest was a bad thing. They wanted to feed on the natural man's desire for self-serving, and so that he would do what was best for him was also good for the whole public. So they really wanted to focus on that. They also really focused on the natural law. Now, before I mentioned when we talked about popular sovereignty, so at the time, the idea of natural law, or that your right to do whatever you want, was subservient to the greater whole of the community. And that means that you can do whatever you want, but if you want to be a part of society, you are giving up those liberties to do whatever you want to be a part of that society. You can no longer be like one with the wolves, okay? You're giving up those rights to a governing body to govern over the whole. So that's the idea of natural rights. And they believed that some of their natural rights were being infringed upon by King George. Some of those rights were the right of conscience, or to believe whom, what, wherever you wanted. The right to life, to be able to live and to do what you needed to do. Of liberty and of economic freedom. And interestingly enough, one of the major advocates for this was a member of Parliament. His name was William Blackstone. He was of the Radical Whig Party. And he wrote many papers and articles and speeches on this importance of natural law, and that if a government goes against these natural laws, then the public has the right to overturn that governing body. And so, of course, the patriot philosophers glommed onto William Blackstone's ideas and said, see, this is why we can rebel. This is our legitimacy, because you are infringing on our right for life, liberty, and economic freedom. Now, the patriot philosophers researched all elements of governing. They did the Romans, the Greeks, democracy, republic. They looked at dictatorships. They looked at everything because they didn't want to make past mistakes that other republics had done. They looked at everything but religion governance. Because part of that comes from the fact that at this time, there was a lot of breaking down of the religious rule in Europe. Rome, the Catholics in Rome didn't really have the stronghold that they had at one point. The Spanish really didn't have the Christianity hold that they did. And the Church of England had just broken away from the Catholic Church. So you didn't really have that religious monopoly of rule. And so that had kind of been breaking apart. And so they really researched all of these various aspects about religious rule. And so we talked about the purpose and the need of the patriot philosophers to justify the rebellion, and they used natural law to do that. They felt the government needed to be carefully structured so that it could control itself and the public. They felt like the government needed to be structured for the common good, for everybody, and that man was virtuous, but were self-interested and corrupt. And so they had to provide auxiliary precautions within the government to overtake and to control the government when man's virtue failed. But they also had to create these auxiliary precautions in order for the government to control itself. Now, democracy versus republic, I think sometimes these get a little bit messed up. So democracy, a pure democracy, is the people are making exact decisions on the exact ruling of the government or how everything happens. A republic is when the public or the voters, they elect someone to represent their views. Now, the patriot philosophers didn't really like the idea of a democracy because they felt that the people's view was swayed easily. This is also called the Ophelia syndrome. We as an individual are smart, intelligent, and do good things. But as a whole, as a mob, we're really stupid. We make dumb choices. And so they wanted to create a fail-safe for this democracy. And they didn't really want a republic either because they didn't want it to be ruled by the elite or be a plutocracy where only a few controlled the entire government. And so they created a democratic republic, where the common people would elect one of their own to represent them in government. All right, so they also wanted to avoid the anarchy and tyranny effects. So in your reading, there was kind of a circle of, like in the Book of Mormon, the circle of pride. It's also the anarchy and tyranny. So anarchy leads to absolute freedom, leads to tyranny, leads to rebellion, leads to anarchy. And so the founding philosophers, or the patriot philosophers, really wanted to avoid this circle. They wanted to kind of make everybody happy. So where did the British and the American relationship happen with all of this? So before 1750, everyone was proud to be British. They said, you know, God save the Queen, God save the King. They were proud British citizens. Well, in 1763, the French and Indian War ended, and it kind of altered their relationship a little bit. The British government started to do taxation on them, and the first direct tax, not having to do with any other acts or any other movements, was the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act was a direct tax that was the very first one, not associated with any other thing or hidden in anything. It was the first direct tax. Everyone that said, if you want these items, you will pay this tax. Now, the Stamp Act was interesting because it went on anything made with paper. We're talking envelopes, paper, money, playing cards. Anything that was made of paper had to have the stamp or you couldn't buy it. And so everyone's affected by this tax. And of course, that didn't make a lot of people happy. and it made the blue collar workers or the everyday man real ticked off. But the upper class were like, yeah, that sucks, but we'll pay it, basically. Well, then some other things started happening. Specific policies that showed intent. The Tea Act, for example, gave exclusive rights to the East India Company, meaning that they had a monopoly. The colonies could not buy tea from anyone else. The British would blockade the harbors and only let the East India Tea Company in. And so they blocked out competition. Well, if you're an upper class tradesman, you thrive on trading with many people. So instantly, a lot of your trade routes are shut down. So that was kind of frustrating. After many of these acts, many of the colonists just refused to buy British goods. We'll say, fine, we'll buy our own. And that's kind of what Benjamin Franklin said to the Parliament. If you continue to do this, we just won't buy your products and we'll make our own stuff. And that's what many of them started to do. And a lot of them couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford the tax. But it's interesting that much of our culture is derived from the British culture. Their idea of Protestantism, square streets, rule of law, there's a right way to do things. So a lot of our culture, a lot of the American culture is based and founded on this British culture way of doing things. Hard work, pulling up by your bootstraps, all that British nose to the grindstone type of attitude. That's where we get a lot of it. Now, mercantilism, I know many people thinking that was stupid. Why did they even go along with that? Well, one thing that you kind of have to look at is perspective. So mercantilism had been done for centuries. That's the way you did it. And so you had all of these colonies from the mother country that would just feed back all of the wealth back to the mother country. And that's what they all did. This was what was done. This was not new. This is just kind of what it was. In fact, the fact that the colonies were getting upset about it, the British were like, wait, what? Why are you upset about this? This is what we've always done. Why are you acting like this is a new thing? And so the way mercantilism worked is the mother country would go to the colonies. And for example, the colonies had a ton of natural resources. Like, let's use lumber, for example. So a colonist would go and cut down a tree and get a bunch of wood and they'd bring it back to the boat. And the person on the boat would be like, thank you for your wood. Here is a credit, a bill of credit. This is you have credit with us now. Well, then that ship would take the raw materials of lumber or wood and they'd take it back to England. And then someone in England would make it into a rocking chair. And then they would ship it back to the colonies, this rocking chair. And then the colonists would have to use their bill of credit to buy the rocking chair. Now, after a while, I think I would get really tired of that. I don't want to buy from exclusively one person. And that's kind of where the colonies got to. They wanted to buy their tea from someone else. They didn't want to have to buy it from one person. And so this idea of freedom, of religious freedom and economic freedom, of wanting to buy and sell to whomever you wanted, really started to drum and kind of itch at some of the colonists. So keep that in the back of your brain. And this is where things were kind of heating up of a little bit of dispute. Now, we get our ideas of rule of law from the British. We feel it's important and society is important. One interesting thing is that our idea of rule of law is from British, but our constitution is extremely unique. It's nothing like the British constitution. The British don't have a constitution. Their constitution fills buildings. They have a constitutional law based on the Magna Carta that is kind of by how stone rolls, how they make laws and they add that to the Constitution. So our Constitution is very unique in that it's short and that it's one document. Marion G. Romney felt very strongly about the rule of law, and he said that if the rule of law breaks down, or society without chaos with laws, if there isn't a rule of law, then chaos will reign. And so he, in your reading, talks a lot about that rule of law. All right, so we talked a little bit about this political freedom and how everything we believe there's a rule of law and that has to go along with these natural rights. And that if we have religious freedom, we start to get this, well, we want to be politically free and we want to do with our money whatever we want. And so these ideas were very, very important to the colonists. And so, okay, so you have all these ideas going on. You have People ticked off about the taxes. You have a desire to trade with more people. You were tired of monopolies, and then you continue to get more taxes. So Benjamin Franklin went to Parliament and said, you guys have got to stop this. Like, the colonists aren't happy. We don't want to pay this tax. It's not fair. We don't have representation in Parliament. Now, the reason this was a big deal is because in English society, the only people who didn't have representation in Parliament were women, children, and slaves. And so the aristocracy of the colonies, that's where it ticked them off. Their wallets they dealt with. But if you insult who they are and who they think they are, they will go blazing guns. So they were being insulted by not being represented in Parliament to make these decisions on taxation. And so they were being treated, in their view, as second-class citizens. And that's when they got upset. And so in 1774, John Adams said that independence, or the idea of a republic or breaking away from a monarchy, became popular overnight. And there's a few reasons for this. Some of them are Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine. Now, Thomas Paine is an interesting guy. So he was of the blue-collar type from England. He's bankrupt several times, kind of a failure. He came to the colonies and was all fired up. And so he wrote this pamphlet on common sense saying, why are we going along with this? We don't have to go with someone who thinks that he has a direct connection with God. He's not. We can rule ourselves. We don't have to be ruled by an island. And we can rule ourselves. And a lot of common men said, hey, yeah, I really know what you're talking about. I agree with you. And so that kind of even more increased this idea, this burning idea, like, I wonder if we could do it. Now, at this point, about a third of the colonists were loyal to England still, or Tories. A third of them were ready to rebel, and a third of them just weren't really sure. They were kind of on the fence on it. And so you have all these things kind of building on each other. And then you have the Declaration of Independence, and it states the principles of government, how they should be, and why they were being violated. Now, what was George Washington's role in this? Honestly, not a lot. He was a British soldier, and he didn't really come into the picture until the Articles of Confederation. And so he was a respected soldier. He led a lot in the French and Indian War. He gained a lot of land and notoriety in the West during those battles. And so he was a pretty respected guy and a respected Virginian. And so this kind of leads us to what's going on next. What's the next step? So we've declared independence. We've told England that we don't want them anymore and we're not happy. Well, then war happens. Doctrine and Covenants 134 defines government protections of the freedom of conscience, right, and control of property and protection of life. So we believe that the government, members of the church believe the government are in charge of protecting these rights. These are natural rights, the natural law rights. And so we're getting to the Articles of Confederation. All right, so before we dive into the Articles of Confederation, are there any questions or concerns?
I'm good.
So far, so good?
So far.
No heads are swimming? All right, awesome. Okay, so we're going to skip this Constitution real quick. We'll come back to it. The Articles of Confederation. Okay, so we've won the war. Fast forward a couple of years. We've won the war. We're all happy. Now what? We need some kind of governing body. Well, true to the Republic, true to the Revolution, the Articles of Confederation didn't want a main central government. They didn't want to just go back into a power-hungry government that they were just escaping. They didn't want to do that again. And so the Articles of Confederation were true to the Revolution because they were trying to be a republic. They were trying to avoid this centralized government. And so each colony had their own form of government, their state government. And so you basically had 13 independent republics living near each other. Now, has anybody ever been on a committee or in a group of people where there are several alpha females who are males that want to be in charge? Mm-hmm. I think we all have. Does anything get done? Sometimes on a good day. So you have these 13 colonies where there's basically factional rule, where a few people are in charge of each state government. It's good because there's not a centralized government. Unfortunately, the federal government has zero power. They can tax all they want, but they can't enforce it. They have no way of banking. Each state is printing their own money. Each state is taxing, doing enormous tariffs to any goods crossing the border. Some states are even negotiating with Britain to go back with Britain. Some states are being controlled by France. So you have all of these various motions going on. And then you have Shays' Rebellion. And at this point, I just read a really interesting book called The Whiskey Rebellion. And at this point, the government didn't have any money, and there were major problems because of all of the various independent republics that were infighting with each other. And so James Madison and Alexander Hamilton felt that the federal government needed more power. They needed a centralized government to kind of bind everything together so that they were all working together. And so James Madison called everybody to a convention to change the Articles of the Confederation. But he didn't tell everybody he wanted to change it. He just told everybody that something needed to happen. Now, the one person that he needed to be there didn't want to be there, and he was going to have nothing to do with it. And that was George Washington. James Madison had to beg him on bended knee to be there. And finally, George Washington came. Why was he needed there? Because it gave A, legitimacy to the convention, and B, they needed someone to be head of the convention that everybody liked, that everybody respected, and everybody respected the soldier of Washington. And so they came to the convention, and they had several issues that they were talking about. And one of those, the very first issue was, can we even alter the Articles of Confederation? Now, the Articles of Confederation were kind of a funny document. It had a loose structure of government. Unfortunately, in order for anything to pass, it had to be unanimous. Okay, so let's go back to this idea of a bunch of alpha people on a committee. Is anything ever unanimous? Rarely, if ever. Do you like chocolate? Yeah, I like chocolate, but I think I like licorice better. Well, I like chocolate better than licorice. I mean, it's crazy. And so you had the same circumstance, is that nothing ever got done because it had to be unanimous. And so they decided finally, by unanimous vote, that they were going to do away with the Articles of Confederation. They were going to alter it. Many people left because they felt like they were overstepping their power and they wanted nothing to do with it. Now, everything was done in secret. Why? Why was it all secret? What was the big deal? You have to remember that these men had just basically committed treason against Britain because doing the Declaration of Independence. And now they were committing treason again against the country they just fought for to do away with the governing body. And so everything was a secret. And you have to remember, if you've ever been to the East Coast or you live on the East Coast, you have to remember July in a teeny tiny room with like 70 guys in wool clothing. Yeah, do you want to say a little bit stinky? Yeah, it was a little stinky. And they wouldn't open the windows. They wanted absolute confidentiality. So they started going all these various things. So they finally decided, okay, yeah, we'll get away. We'll do away with Articles of Confederation. We'll create a new document. Well, James Madison had a plan. And his plan was entitled the Virginia Plan. Now, James Madison wasn't a very popular guy. He was kind of a little weaselly, and so he wasn't very popular. And so he had the governor of Virginia present this plan. And in the Virginia Plan, there was a bicameral or a two-house government based on representation of the population, and that would have balance in the legislature. Well, this was good, except James Madison was from Virginia, one of the biggest populating states. And so, of course, he was in favor of this because Virginia would have a ton of representatives in Congress and in the Senate. Well, little colonies like Rhode Island were like, no, that's not a good plan, because they didn't want to be completely controlled by the southern slave-holding states. And so there was lots of compromising, lots of going back and forth, lots of committees, and they finally came up with the part of the Constitution where they had the House of Representatives that was based on the size of the population, and then they had the Senate where each state got 2 senators that were elected by the legislature. Now, that was changed later in the 17th Amendment of the Constitution, which made it so the senators were elected by the state, by the people. And so, but initially it was by the legislature. The second compromise that was a big deal was the slavery compromise. Now, again, I think sometimes we are harsh judges of history. I'm not saying I'm in favor of slavery. I think it's horrible and abhorrent and morally wrong and not good. But we have to kind of think perspective of these individuals. It was purely economic. This is the way it had always been done. And they didn't view it as, the southern states didn't view it as morally wrong because it had never been morally wrong before. It was just a fact. And they knew that they couldn't run their plantations without these slaves. And so the northern group were morally against slavery for good reason. And so they didn't want slavery to happen anymore. But the South said, well, you get all of our cotton and our tobacco, but you're not in favor of how we do it. Like, that doesn't make sense. And so the southern states, originally they wanted to just do away with slavery, but the southern states said that they would walk. And so it was either an option of getting rid of slavery or going with creating a nation and dealing with it later. And so I think sometimes we can kind of be a harsh judge of these men because we think slavery is wrong, and it is. But if it was between having that and doing away with something they knew was a good thing, I think we have to double think it a little bit. We have to think on it. Now, the compromises that they made were that they would stop importation of slaves in 20 years, not the slavery practice, but they would stop importing slaves from Africa. And that each slave, this is kind of the funny part, the South didn't want the slaves to have representatives. They didn't want to count the slaves as people because they weren't people, but they wanted to count them so that they could have more representation in Congress. So you're kind of like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And you're right, it doesn't. It absolutely does not make any sense. But their compromise was that a slave would count as 3/5 a person in order to gain those representatives in Congress. And so that's what they did. And that was the slavery compromise. And then the Constitution that they were basing it on was the British Constitution that showed a balance of power between these social classes. The British Constitution showed a balance of power between social classes, but the Americans really didn't. We've never really had official social classes, aristocracy and blue-collar workers. We do unofficially, but the British Constitution catered to those classes. And it's interesting because originally our idea of Constitution was based on what the British Constitution was originally based on, the Magna Carta. Has anyone seen Robin Hood with Russell Crowe? It's an older movie. But at the very end of the movie, you get all of the various village heads that come together and they vote and they write on this document about how they're going to have the right to petition the king. They're going to have the right to do all these various things so that they can function in society. That was the Magna Carta. And that's what the United States or the colonies were basing their idea on, a constitution. Now we know that our Constitution is based on the British ideas and the British morality and the British way of doing things. Why not French? Why not Spanish? Well, the French kind of had the idea that they were coming for the natural resources and to convert all of the natives to their religion. The British were in it for the money. They were in it economically. They sent the Mayflower over, said, yeah, okay, you can practice religion. This is the Virginia company. Yeah, go practice religion, but you need to pay us money and you need to send us these resources. So the British were there for the economic reasons, whereas the French colonial were there for more of like creating a new society. So that was kind of the difference of why the colonists went with the British rather than the French ideas. All right, so now we're going to kind of go more into the Constitution. If you'll see on the announcement that was sent out on Monday, there is a constitutional worksheet attached to it. You don't need to turn that in, but it is purely for your study aids for the test. Wink, wink. So make sure that you fill out the constitutional worksheet because it will come in very handy because you can use your notes on the test. Wink, wink. You'll need to know kind of what the First Amendment says, what is included in the First Amendment, what does the wording say is protected. You'll kind of need to know what amendments cover what. And again, this is on the constitutional worksheet. You don't need to have this memorized. And then also, Elder Oaks believed that the Constitution was inspired. It was an inspired document, but not every word needed to be defended as scripture. He believed that some of the administrative items, like how old a senator or president or representative may be, wasn't actually inspired. And obviously, the slavery compromise, the actual idea of slavery wasn't inspired. And so he believed that the ideas that are moving with society, that are adapting, that are creating this living document is an inspired idea. All right, are there questions or concerns about the study guide or the class or whatever?
I can't think of any.
No? Okay. So like I said, the exam opens Friday and it closes Monday at 11:59. You have 2 hours to complete the exam. It is 37 questions, multiple choice, true and false. And again, it is open book, open note. One thing to remember is that all of the lesson exams are open book, open note, except for the final. And the final is closed book, closed note. But the final, the best way to study the final is to study all of the lesson exams. You gotta
study all the lesson what?
All the exams that you've
Exams.
been taking. You'll take 6 of them. So if you study all those exams, because after the exam closes, you can open it up and see all the questions and see the right answers once the exam closes. So once the exam closes, you can go back into your user progress and open up the exam, and you can see which ones you got right, which ones you missed, and it'll show you the right answer. So that's a really good study aid for the final. All right. Any other concerns or questions? I know that group work is crazy and you guys are totally overwhelmed thinking, what are you doing to this? This makes no sense. But I promise in like a couple of weeks, you will have it down. You'll be absolute expert. I promise.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when is the due date of the reply to the discussion board?
So it's Friday or Saturday, depending on what your group leader has said. If they want your replies in by Friday so that they can start, so that the group can start polishing the most chosen 4 essays, you'll need to have them done by Friday. But some group leaders aren't going to work on it till Saturday afternoon. So they may tell you have everything done by Saturday afternoon. So it's really based on the group leader.
Thank you.
If they have designated a preference.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
I'm the group leader and I'm just not sure if I'm doing it right. So I had put in and you'd answered part of my question, but the part that I'm confused about is the editing. And so we choose one question that we think has like the best answers, and then we're going to create an essay from that. from those answers.
So,
Correct?
yeah, so you'll find whichever essay is voted on the most, whichever essay has the most plus sign likes, if you will. You can take that essay and polish that response, and that will be the submission for that question.
Okay, so I had assigned, because I wasn't sure, anyway, I assigned each team member somebody else in the team for them to edit each other's questions, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, their answers.
Right.
And then once they've edited it, then I asked them to go ahead and submit the edited version to me, and then I was going to put it all together in a document and then do final editing. Was that correct? Is that how?
I think it is, but I think you're making it too complicated.
Okay.
Because you don't know which essay is going to be the most chosen, like which essay is going to be because the idea is you're voting on which essay is going to be the best.
Okay.
And
right.
so if I'm trying to figure out how that would work.
Yeah, I think that I need to be more clear, but I meant for them, because I said that they had to have their voting and everything done by Thursday. And then once we have chosen the one that's voted on the most, then on Friday is when they'll start doing their editing, and then they need to have that editing turned into me by Saturday, so I can work on it on Saturday night.
So you had like one group member assigned to question 1, is that what you mean?
Well, no. So like so they know who they're editing, but they don't know what question they're going to be editing until the votes are turned in.
Okay, the only problem I see with that is you don't know if certain people are going to have the chosen essay. Do you know what I'm saying?
So, but everybody needs to respond to the questions.
Right, everyone needs to respond to the questions, but only one of those questions is going to be chosen as the response.
Okay.
And you're welcome to combine them to more fully answer the question.
Okay.
But, like for example, if you and I were in a group together, you could assign me to edit your essays, but maybe none of your essays were chosen as the most popular out of the question.
Okay. Okay, I think I get it.
And so like, for example, question 1, in theory, 12 of you will respond to the question, or 11 of you will respond to the question. And then out of all of those responses, your whole group will vote on which ones are the best. And that one that gets the most votes, you'll then polish that one.
Oh, we are voting on the individual.
On each question, yeah, each response on each question.
Okay, I gotcha. I thought we were voting on the question as a whole, like which one had the best response as the whole class, not the individuals.
Yeah, so each individual, that's why there's a plus sign by each of the essays.
Okay.
They can vote on each one of those plus signs, and so whichever essay has like 12 likes or 10 likes or whatever, you'd be like, okay, that's the best one. And then you take that individual and then you polish it and then you put it in the one document.
That's perfect. Okay, that's why. Okay, that makes so much more sense to me. I didn't realize that it was each individual one. So
right, you're like, I'm totally confused.
Yeah, so I need to go back and change that.
Yeah, so for each question, you're gonna have one response that you're gonna put in one document.
Yes. Okay.
So you have 6 essays. Does that make more sense?
Yes. I thought we were doing one. Anyway, yeah, totally more sense. That makes a lot more sense.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
I'm glad we're speaking the same language. Sorry. Okay, but let's say that. Did I say it right or did I totally screw it up?
Did great.
Nice. Okay. Is it possible to have the test open earlier heading out camping? Unfortunately, no. The university is very strict about when I can open exams and when I can close exams. Usually the only time I can open an exam earlier is for a medical emergency or open it late. So unfortunately, no, I'm sorry, but I'm excited that you get to go camping.
Sounds great, thanks.
James, are the responses to each question meant to be a paragraph or an essay? Or is the initial post just to be a paragraph and the responses help develop the post into an essay? So when I say essay / paragraph, it means that your responses need to be 4 or 5 lines long. So a short essay. I'm not talking about like a keyhole essay, so you have to integrate all the various questions into one big long essay. No, that's way too complicated. Each response for the one question needs to be essay length, so like 4 or 5 sentences.
4 or 5 sentences.
So like an introduction sentence, 3 or 4 supporting sentences, and a conclusion sentence. So little essays for each question. And that goes for every single assignment. Whether it's a discussion board post or your initial post, when your first initial post to a question needs to be in that essay form. And that will just save everyone time in the end of the week. Does that help, James? Sure, no problem. All right, anything else, or is that it?
All right, well, thank you for doing this.
You bet. Have a great night. I hope you're able
Have a
to
great
relax,
night.
have some chocolate or something.
Yeah. Did you record this now?
I did. I
Did.
did
Okay,
record
I'll
it.
be looking forward to it.
Awesome. Yep. So I will post it, and we'll get it out, and it'll probably, if it's not